Welcome back to the Growth Design Podcast, everyone. And I have my incredible co host, as always, Emmanuel.
Hi guys, good to be back again.
All right. And today we have a very exciting topic, exciting guest with us. And her name is Sara Gattoni. And we're just excited to delve into all things data with her. Hi, Sarah.
Hello, everyone. Good to be here.
Thank you so much. Okay, in today's conversation, we'll be tackling a challenge. A lot of designers are familiar with it when it comes to like what separates good from great design and how do you weave compelling stories when you think about quantitative and qualitative data. So, our guest today, Sarah, is also known as the one and only Data Witch, which is a very interesting name, and we will get into the nickname later. And we're just going to kick things off with Sarah's background. So, hi, Sarah, can you share your journey with us?
Absolutely happy to do that. I'm Sara, I'm Italian, and at the moment I'm leading growth at Localized. But as a background, I am a mathematician. So I have a degree in mathematics. I studied in Italy, in Bologna. And after that, I did my PhD in London, where I was modeling the heart in St. Thomas Hospital. During this period, I also opened my travel blog and I started learning marketing and SEO. These are my first steps in the digital space and in product. And after the PhD, I moved back to Italy. I was teaching math and physics in school for a year because that was my dream. And right before that, I jumped into this startup, which is called Small PDF. And I have been there for 6 years. When I joined, it was 9 people in the team. When I left, it was 160. And we had about 60 million active users per month. And then Small PDF, I've been wearing many different hats. I was a marketing engineer, data analyst. I was leading the data team first, then leading the discovery team. And ultimately, I decided to move into growth. And this is where my path in growth started.
Wow, you've had a truly fascinating career trajectory, right? Like you said, you've gone from modeling the heart and then now also leading successful growth teams at companies like Small PDF. I think I'm curious what sparked the initial shift from academia and research into the exciting world of startups and products.
I think mostly it's because I was bored. So it took me 2 years to build a mathematical model for my PhD. But the PhD overall lasted for 4.5 years. And besides some interesting applications of the model, I was mainly dealing with all the painful bureaucratical process that you have when you have to submit research papers and then you have many people involved, a lot of iteration, and everything is completely and extremely slow. So if I think about it, at the moment in time, I was still in a very exploratory phase of my life, and I think I had not fully elaborated what my values are. And today I'm in a different place because I know that I need a very challenging, fast paced, and exciting environment to thrive. And I'm constantly seeking growth. And this is definitely one of my personal values.
Quite interesting, and having to find research quite slow. I'm a bit surprised, right, in terms of being an academia and looking at making research in academic and also in products, right? Will you say that your desire for immediate results is what really draw you to product and growth other than just staying and making research? Because we can kind of just oppose both of them together in terms of making research in product and in academic.
Yes and no, but in general, yes, I have a bias for action.
Mm, hmm.
Nature. This is just who I am. And as I said, research was just way too slow for my personal, for a person like me. And I think in general, what led me to growth at the end of the day, it's a process. Most of all, I think personal discovery. And I sort of treated myself as a product. So I started with exploration. I was studying very different things. I was changing my jobs. I was learning completely different skills in completely different areas. And I remember my friends and my family be like, oh my God, you are just like jumping everywhere. This for me was like a research and exploration phase of my life. And I think this allowed me to understand what the Sara products needs to be happy and satisfied at work and in
Mm,
life. And the way it went is very simple. I was just like learning so much and then analyzing the data And I sort of like I built my own definition of success, and I decided to that growth was my future. And I think when I think about growth and people ask me why growth, it is mostly because I think I can use the skills that I love in my job, and at the same time still are skills that I'm quite good at, right? So at the end of the day, what I need is to be able to see the results of what I do to get excited. And I don't really care if the results are good or bad, right? In both cases, I feel like I'm learning something new. And this is what it fuels my excitement, sparkles my creativity, and it's just a way that I can continuously learn and maintain myself curious.
Nice. Okay. So, in a nutshell, no one can pay you enough to go back to academia.
I love teaching. Like I really love teaching. In an ideal world, I would be teaching, but it's just not possible for the way things are in
Hmm.
school. Like it's just like it's another topic to explore.
I can understand that. Okay. So, before we come to your nickname about being data witch, which I'm itching to ask you about that, there is a fun question that sort of came in, a cheat code from Ben, who's been on the podcast before. And it's basically, how did you manage to grow your personal accounts to like 20,000 followers?
So my personal account grew because of my SEO efforts, I think. I opened this account 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And basically what I did there, I was exploring and doing a lot of experiment with SEO. And at some
Mm.
point I managed to rank very well for some specific keywords. And all in a sudden I had a lot of followers.
Wow.
but but then this sort of like in the end these followers now are completely not active, right? Because now it's my personal so this is actually paying me back like in a bad way because and people are not active. I'm not sharing travels or the kind of things that they expect, right? So I have a ghost account that nobody's using
Oh, no.
and it is quite funny. But it was mostly via SEO with all the experiment that I was doing when I was
Oh
learning
my
that.
God. That is so incredible that
Like,
you were able to hack SEO and then bring that into personal Instagram. I think now
yeah.
it's going in so many directions.
Even me too. I'm like, I don't know that that's even possible on social media. Like, it's been influenced by SEO, so I know for keywords, but that aspect it's kind of new to me.
That also, so this is actually quite a fun story because this is also how I got into this job as more PDF. I had
Mm.
a PhD, but I was like, they were looking for somebody that could do data and marketing at the same time. And then I
Um.
presented my blog, I presented my SEO skills, and this is how I
Wow.
got.
Okay, that's no, that's incredible. Honestly, I have to say.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we now have to ask you, Data Witch, how did that name come about, and what does it represent to you in terms of your approach to data and product growth?
So I think it's mostly about the fact that I manage to organize all the data that I see together and to generate a very comprehensive picture. And most of the time, people think it's magic. It is not magic. And still, I really like the name, so I keep it in my LinkedIn as Sara the Data Witch. I think it is true that my knowledge in mathematics, statistics, has been and still is a great asset for my career as a growth product manager. And that this is not only from the perspective of pure knowledge, like, I can run A/B tests and say when they're significant, okay. But especially from my, like the way that I approach problems, it's more like a problem solving standpoint. So I think my studies gave me the ability to tackle every problem programmatically. So what I do normally is I break down a problem that might seem very big to into many small sub problems, and I solve them sequentially with a logical
Mm.
criteria, right? Without panicking or stressing. And I think this ability that I have to break down the problem into sub problem and organize the work without overburdening the resources that I have is something that is highly appreciated by my teams. And in general, I believe that a good use of the scientific approach, and obviously without forgetting the emotional, psychological aspects and everything, are very interesting aspects, especially for a group PM.
Interesting. Being a data witch, right? I think it's a good way to now come into this frame of conversation of data driven and being data informed. Looking at these two words, I believe it's been, I don't want to say data driven is being overused, But lately I was reading a book and there was this conversation around there's a difference between data driven and data informed, and it got me like confused a little bit. But then let me hear from the data witch herself, right? Curious to hear if you could break down these two terms, like what it means to be data driven and being data informed in practical and where they differ in principle itself.
Yeah, I can tell you about the way that I imagine they differ for myself. So I think when we think about data, and in general, people think about data and the data teams that we have, data engineers, analysts, scientists, whatever, we often only refer to quantitative data. And organizing your quantitative data well and taking the choices based on those quantitative data is what I personally call being data driven.
Mm,
But when we talk about being data informed, we're talking about having a full rounded view.
mm,
So, what this means is that we are processing all the information that we have as equally valuable and then
mm,
following a methodological scientific approach with hypothesis formulation, validation that basically takes care of all the different informations that we have. And I think in my work, personally, I'm very much a data informed type of
yeah,
person.
yeah,
For me, data are information that can basically arrive from anywhere, right?
yeah,
So I always try to have the full rounded picture in my mind. I take the external information that I gather from the market that I'm trying to access with the product, the competitors that we have in the field, the trends that I see around, and I take also the internal information that really comes from everywhere, right? On one side, we have the qualitative data that can come from the interviews, can come from prototype testing, the sales team that spoke with potential prospects. It comes from customer success team, support. And also we have the quantitative data, and there are more like the behavioral data. And I think, yes, processing all these informations allows me to build an hypothesis that I then test in different ways to validate or invalidate and consequently continuously generate new hypotheses.
That's pretty great. And you're talking about consistently blending qualitative, quantitative data, right? At Small PDF, you talked about it. You dealt with huge amounts of data and growing as fast as 60 million users a month. That's an incredible number, right? When you think about common traps that you've seen companies fall into when it's like over relying on numbers or not using user stories without data connection, what are those traps that you've seen and you've noticed?
Yeah, there's a few traps that come into my mind. If, for example, it might happen that you are not interviewing enough people, but you're still generating a generic qualitative hypothesis that are not only affecting, but so basically you have an hypothesis that is affecting a minority of the users, and you're generalizing it, right? Just because you have been interviewed a restricted amount of people. And in this case, if we do not complement this qualitative hypothesis with market behavior or product behavior, we could end up solving a problem that only affects a tiny portion of the users. And this will result in spending a lot of time building a feature or solving a problem that would have very, very small impact on your business metric. And this is one thing. Another thing that comes into my mind, in the contrary, is interviewing or testing with people only in a specific segment. For example, let's say I interview all users in SMBs, 10 users in SMBs, but then I generalize the hypothesis and quantitatively test with a mix of people or a completely different segment, right? So I am testing with enterprise level customers. Then what might happen is that you think that your hypothesis is valid when actually you're actually just testing with a different segment that you interviewed, right? So your hypothesis is not invalid. It might be very valid still for your segment. And another thing that came to my mind, it's actually a case where there's companies that deal with very big amounts of quantitative data. They process and they analyze those, and they think that they're looking to a very comprehensive picture, and still, if they miss the qualitative aspect, they miss the why. And this is fundamental to understand the reason behind taking certain actions. Otherwise, you might end up thinking the majority of people is going through this funnel. That's the preferred way, when it's simply a workaround or not even taking them where they want, right? It's just because you see the behavioral data, they're doing this. What does it mean? Do they really want to do it, or is it a workaround for them? You will never able to tell without looking at the qualitative data. And then there's another couple of things that came to my mind that could be traps. And one is not getting the methodology right. For example, people tend to say what they want, right? Very often they also idealize their behavior and tell you they're doing X and Y, when in reality they wish to do it, but they are not actually behaving the way that they say. So when you're qualitatively assessing behavior, you need to use the right methodology, right? With your testing, with your questions, with interactive prototypes. And always it is fundamental to complement this with the qualitative findings and the quantitative behavioral data to see if what they say actually reflects the reality of what they do in the product. And the last thing, it's about the focus on your ideal customer profiles. I've seen companies that do not focus on their ICPs. Defining the ICPs is a job that requires a clear mix of qualitative and quantitative data. I never trust ICP definition that only use one or the other, right? Only qualitative might have all the problems that I said before, or only using quantitative data misses the why and only reflects the current status quo of your product. Which anyway, what would happen is that you massively reduce the potential to broaden your audience, but also to fully succeed with your current one.
I was just thinking as you were talking, especially for companies that do have massive amounts of data, right? And I see that all the time. And it's something I'm actually also seeing at work at the moment, where there is 500 million global users. You can imagine how much data we're wading through, right? But then oftentimes it then becomes easy to rely on just the quantitative because we have the numbers to prove these things, right?
Yeah.
Now, from a designer's perspective, it can then be very like somehow like you're pushing uphill in that battle for understanding how to fit those blocks in with qualitative data. What would your recommendation be in those kinds of scenarios?
Recommendation to the designer:
Yeah.
never give up on interviewing. No way, don't do that. It's a completely different type of perspective that you have on your customers. This is of fundamental importance. And if they are telling you that you don't have to talk to customers and that the quantitative side is more important than the qualitative,
Mm.
this wouldn't work, right? We are just missing one side of the stories. And I'm not telling that you have to talk with 50 people per month, but still keep the conversation going and try to understand what the needs of your users are, independent of the quantitative data that you get.
So, looking at qualitative data, right? You talked about, I think, in the conversation we had about you using Airtable to centralize qualitative data and linking it back to user behavior. So, what are your thoughts around centralized data banks, and can you walk us through your process for creating such? And if you could add, how is that useful for making design decisions?
I think it is fundamental to get the basics right, and the sooner the better. So
Mm.
early on, immediately, as soon as possible. I see a lot of companies of different types, right? Different stages. They all have massive silos. And this means that they also have restricted views. There's no internal exchange of data between departments, and this simply doesn't work. This is a recipe for failure. So, what are the basics? I think if we look at the quantitative side, what you want to do is to get all your information in a single place. For example, at Localized, we use Airtable, but you can use other tools. And I've used Product Board before. And all this qualitative information that you have, as I was saying previously, can arrive from different sources, right? So from sales, for example, in every single attempt that they do to sell their product, they are gathering data for us. Or in their win-loss interview, why did we lose this customer? What didn't go well? Or the needs that we were not answering. They can also arrive from customer success when they try to explain the functionality or upsell the product to a customer. They can arrive from support with all the different requests they get from the prospect, and also obviously from the design, the UX department, because they're interviewing them. and they understand the needs and the behaviors. So there's a massive amount of qualitative data that we can generate from the different departments. And obviously, those must be centralized and structured in a way that they can be easily organized and processed by everybody. And this also means that most of the time we should set questions that must be repeatedly asked to validate certain high level hypotheses that we have. And the last and most important part is that this centralized database should be accessible for literally everyone.
Mm.
So, a localized, this is the very first task that we started when I joined. And for me, this is fundamental because it's just unsustainable to have to go and talk to sales every 5 minutes, customer success and support. And like, I have work to do. But if this flows automatically to
Mm.
me, and I can simply ask a question with AI and get everything I need, it's
Mm.
another life, right? So my designer, Ben, that you guys interviewed before, built this very cool tool on top of our Airtable centralized database, and it's called Ben AI. And basically, this tool allows anyone to just go and ask questions to the database, and we simply get answers with AI. So I can ask about competition, I can ask about anything, right? And this was just a fantastic game changer for the team and actually the entire at all the departments because everybody is using the centralized table and Ben AI.
Oh my god, that's really cool. Ben AI.
Ben AI,
So it
I
sounds
know.
like a real product.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think he has a plan for the product. I am pretty sure.
That
Nice.
that makes sense, and I would not be surprised. It's Ben after all.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so now let's talk about weaving cohesive stories, right? What are practical steps that people can take when it comes to now? You've got all these different data points. How do you then begin to structure it and get that full picture around it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the most important thing, in my opinion, is always to start by defining your ideal customer profiles, right? So you can start from qualitative assumption, you can start from quantitative behavioral, the way that you prefer, right? If you start from qualitative assumption, most likely you have been running interviews and now you know what the jobs to be done of your customer potential customers are, you know the type of customer that you want, and now you just define your ICP and move forward. Or you can start from quantitative behavioral data and then maybe have a look at people that are paying, like returning customers, they're generating ARR, or they're just like coming back to the product very often. Those are people that definitely are getting value out of the product, and those can be initially ICPs. And then with this initial definition, what you want to do is to dig deeper into the needs of your ICP and their behavioral data internally, but also compare them with the needs and the behavioral data in the market, right? So it is fundamental to be able to compare the two. And I often use ODI, which is outcome driven innovation, to identify the gaps and the opportunities. So basically, what this means is that yes, we have surveys of different types that we send to the market or the ICPs. And then we ask for every particular need that we identified or particular feature that we have, how important it is for you, and how satisfied are you with the current solution that you have. That can be a solution in my product or a solution in another product. And then the gap that you see there, it's an opportunity, right? Where cases where a particular need or a particular feature is very important but super unsatisfied are cases where you have an opportunity to work. And then very normally prioritize the opportunity based on the return that you want. Do you want more customers? Do you want more simply active users, depending on what you want? And then divide work in your teams and then do it all over again, right? Go deeper into the topic, qualitative interviews, generate hypotheses, measure with the data, A/B test, new hypotheses, and so on and so forth.
You've led both sides. I mean, you have experience on both sides being a data scientist and even being a researcher. Also, being a growth lead right now at Localized. That's you already have a rich history of collaborating with designers already. What would be your advice for designers who are intimidated by data or they are even unsure on how to communicate their needs effectively to data team? And I would say it's a common problem because we designers and numbers and data, it's scary sometimes. You don't even know how to see what you need out. So how will you advise a designer to get started at that?
That's a very interesting question, and it also makes me laugh because when I joined Small PDF, one of the person that was there was a designer, a friend of mine. Today we worked together 6 years, and it was super afraid by data. It would come to me and was like, "Oh my god, I have to look at the data. I don't know how to do it. I really want it, but like." And then by the moment I left, it was building charts, doing everything on his own,
Wow.
asking me things, and I was like, "Wow, that was a change." But so, what should designers do? Start from the basic. So familiarize yourself with basic data concepts and terminology and everything. So what is a KPI, a metric, a segmentation, an A/B test, and whatever. A lot of people know it already, but there's also a lot of designers that are not familiar with the terms. And very easily you can do it with a short course, attend a workshop, read a blog. I have many blogs that I read, and then if you have the opportunity, you can also learn some basic SQL. I think SQL is very easy, like in 2 days. A lot of people could get it, but people are afraid. I don't know why, but it's actually easy. And then one thing that is very important, in my opinion, is to define your goals. So before you're approaching the data team, you need to be clear about what you want to achieve. Are you trying to understand a specific user behavior? Are you trying to test a design hypothesis? Are you trying to measure the impact of something? What is it that you're trying to do? So most of the time, when there's miscommunication, is because the objective is not defined in the right way. And what happens is that the data team doesn't understand the need, and then it's not providing the right assistance because the need it was not clear. So define your objective very early and in a very structured way. Then clearly you want to involve the data analyst or the PM, if the PM is data savvy, very early on in your design process. This is super fundamental. This way, they can provide the input on what data can be collected first, because there are cases where the data are not there, cannot even be collected. And also how you can use them to inform your design decisions. And it's very important that this flow is continuous. It's a continuous flow, right? So with Ben, this is just amazing because Ben gives me like, boom, these are the screens, and I'm like putting data on top, and then it is adding other data, and then we're like, okay, patterns, problem here, and then we keep flowing. That we have this mirror board that we both work in different moments, in different days, and we just keep it going. And ask for help. In most of the cases, you have data help channels in Slack. We have data team replying to questions. Just ask. Don't be afraid of asking. There is no problem. Actually, it's great to hear more questions. And then also, it is nice if the designers can leverage some data visualization to make their design choices more comprehensible. And I think this very often it happens that there's people that have amazing designs, but they're not backed up by data, right? And if you don't back them up by data, it is possible that your ideas are great, but then the buy-in from the leadership is not going to be there because they just don't see why you took certain decisions. And I think also one thing that is very interesting is to create a shared language with the other teams. So one thing that, for example, I have done everywhere I went and wherever I go is to develop a glossary of terms. And normally I start doing it with the designers and myself, and then I involve product and data team. But this is something I normally work on very early when I'm in a new company, and it can really help bridge any communication gaps that you have with all the other departments. And ideally, then I extend it to the entire company, right? So I start proposing the way that we talk, and then as per like continuing, we start talking about having a shared language is also very important. One other aspect that I want to mention is just to be open to iteration, right? It is important to understand that when we work with data, this often involves trial and error approach, right? So be open to refine your questions, your hypotheses, your design based on whatever comes next, because every single iteration that we send out is going to return with tons of data that will tell us that if our hypothesis was valid or not valid, and then we have to readapt completely whatever we do on the next iteration. So really be open iteration.
Let's look at a scenario where you are in a team, let's say for early stage startup, right? As a designer on a early stage startup, and you don't have the budget to have, say, like a dedicated data team that you work with, or even working with a data analyst alongside with you. How would you say such designer can get started with data? Even if you have a data analyst working with you, you know how difficult it is to communicate, let alone that you don't have those structure around you. How can a designer all by himself kind of get started in such a way that he could get himself informed by data or using data in such scenario?
I imagine we're talking about quantitative data here, right?
Yes, yes, definitely. What? Yeah,
Real data. I think that it is going to be fundamental to see if there is a way to do we have the data in the first place? Because in many cases, if that's the case, the designer is there and there's no data person in the company,
yes,
most likely we don't have the data. We don't have a structured data warehouse yet. So I would distinguish the two cases. If there is a
there's
data.
no data. Yeah, there's no data at all. You are trying to bring that into it. Let's assume that scenario.
Yes, so there is no data at all. So I think you can find tools that can give you the data. Like, so it's just like talk to engineers and start embedding some third party tools that can give you the data that you're looking for, right? And this is something that you can simply do with whatever engineers. I don't know. I want data about the company size or whatever that is. I plug in Clearbit and then all in a sudden I have the flow of data. Or I look at audio recording and I have data about the session of the users, right? And then if the data are already in place, what you want to know is it involves a lot, especially at the beginning, talking with your software engineers and making sure that you can also, like, what I would suggest is to talk to the engineer and to try to tell them what you're trying to measure, right? Because I have seen this happening in startups. It's just that you have to go to the engineer and say, there's this funnel, three main steps. I want to be able to see how many people go through that. Can we put some data there? And then they will be like, sure, it's going to be simple, and they just put some events to fire for you,
Mhm.
and then with basic SQL you can build a funnel, right? So either via third party tools or simply by talking with a software engineer and plugging in some very easy events.
Good, good, awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, and you've emphasized that data scientists need to also get the why behind it. We talked about it from a design perspective. Now let's flip the script, right? So for data teams, how can they begin to push for when they don't have enough context, or whoever is requesting the data has not given enough context around the work? How can they make that push and ensure that they know how to build that data story as well that will enrich whatever the final outcomes are?
So we're talking about the data perspective.
Exactly, the data.
Yes, so I think the data analyst should first of all try to be proactive and not reactive. And I see this happening in all the companies that I advise, guys. All departments, just what happens, they just drop tasks to the data team get overloaded and it drowns. End of the story, goodbye. I know that it is not easy to resurrect from a situation where you have been literally bombarded with tasks from many departments, but it is the job of the data team to build an environment where different departments and different roles can consume the data self-serve. And now the question is, how do we get there? To get there, we need a good data architecture, as I said. So systems really need to talk to each other. We need a proper documentation of everything that we do. And when I talk about proper documentation, I mean proper documentation about the events, proper documentation about the tables that we have. And this documentation needs to be able to speak to different type of personas, because if I am a PM, I might be interested in feature behavior or whatever. If I'm in a designer, I'm interested in a particular thing that I'm working on. If I am an engineer, I am interested in the performance of something, right? So this, whatever the data team build, needs to be able to speak to the different personas. And another thing that is fundamental and never happens is the enabling sessions. So I have seen many data teams that nailed the first part. So now they have a structure, an architecture that works. They even have the documentation, but nobody knows where the documentation is, or the documentation is not clear. And it is simple. We just have to bring the documentation in front of the people that are going to use it and ask, do you understand? What are you missing? And then we fine. And so I think when data start becoming self-serve, then the scientists can simply support in the complex, more complex tasks. And this means they are like opening up time for themselves to proactively analyze using more like a full rounded view. And this should be the ultimate goal of the data team. And when it comes to the actual tasks, I believe the data scientist should really act similarly to the PM. So the important part is always try to understand what the task is about. So whenever you receive a task, which most of the cases might come from a PM or a designer, and it's not formulated in the right way, before jumping on the task, because I know that you are a data scientist, are alone and super overwhelmed, before jumping into that, go back to the person that asked the task. Why are you asking me to do this? What is the goal? What is the hypothesis behind it? It literally takes 5 minutes, but it's going to save you tons of time and it's going to point you in the right direction, right? Most of the questions are simply not formulated the right way. And I think it's the job of both the PM and the data scientist to like decide together and how to visualize this data in the best way to achieve the goals.
That's great. I like how you said about making data self-serve in such a way that anybody on the team from any department could easily go to the data bank or data wages to search for any data they need. I think that's simply brilliant. If most team can have that, I think it's going to make our life quite easy as a team working together. So you talked about advising multiple companies, right? And also leading growth at a small team that eventually grew up to being a large team and right now at Localized. What are some of the red flags that a company's design culture might be too data reliant to the point where it stiffens creativity and intuition?
There are some red flags there, and I think one of the red flags it could be a sort of paralysis, right? So detailed analysis is required for everything that you want to do. I have seen this happening. So in such a case, we will see that the decision making is frequently delayed, and instead, what happens is there's constant gathering of data, analyzing data, and we're missing opportunities and slowing the process. And this also leads to a lack of experimentation. So you will see as a result there's little or no room for trying anything new or untested idea or taking a creative approach or a risk, because every decision must be backed by perfect data. This is an environment that it's simply not possible. And I think this is also something that it is a little bit of a challenge for the majority of the data analysts or scientists that I see there. What level of precisions you want to have in your analysis, right? And this is something that when I switched and I became a growth product manager, I had to give up on analysis perfection because I have so many other things that I have to take care of that I am happy. For some analysis, I want 99% accuracies. For others, I am happy with 80% accuracy, right? You need to have this trade off. And overemphasizing metrics. So in some cases, there's like cases where success is measured solely and ultimately by a quantitative metric, conversion rate, click-through rate. And there is no consideration of the qualitative feedback of the user experience. That is also a mistake. Fantastic, we have improved the click-through rate, but people are not happy, right? I have seen this happening tons of time. There is this fantastic notification that we said, look, the click-through rate went up, bellissimo, but no, people are very so much unsatisfied that then they are simply leaving. And we see that at the end of the day, the retention is way worse than before because we are disturbing their flow. So you cannot only rely on this quantitative metrics. And then other red flags, it can happen that there's a very rigid process. So the design process becomes strictly like it's not flexible. It cannot deviate from the data-driven protocols, data says that this must be done this way. We cannot innovative thinking, and we just have to follow. And this sort of leads to, it's like you're sort of optimizing rather than innovating all the time. You're sort of stuck in a local minimum. And then of course this turns out in many other consequences, right? There's suppression of intuition, so the designer instinct is sort of killed, and they are just just sticking to the data that they're given and try to improve these little metrics that they're given, and it's bad because it prevents innovation.
Interesting.
So for smaller teams, and when you think about the ones that are just getting started in growth, right? What low lift ways, low entry, low barrier, can they begin to think about bringing in data driven thinking into their design process? Now we've gone through this all these ways in which data can stifle designers, but then when you don't even have access to data scientists in the first place, how can you in a small team move quickly with the data that you have?
Okay. I think, I mean, if I understood the question right, I would suggest to first thing that you want to do is anyway to centralize your qualitative data and quantitative data in a single place and find a way for them to speak among each other, right? So an identifier that allows you to go through the entire journey. And I would suggest to not use many tools to start with. This is a common issue, right? We plug in 25,000 different tools, and they have one has a customer ID, one has a user ID, one has another identifier, and people get lost and cannot just like make things talk to each other, or they just live in another a galaxy, right? And allow everyone to have access to the data. This is something I mentioned, and it is fundamental. And data can be raw data if you have people that are able to run their own queries, but they also can be pre-computed tables. So very simply, you pre-compute your tables and then you use those. Build a comprehensive documentation from the start. So this is such a pain point when I jump into advising companies that have been working for 7 years. I have a team of 120 people, zero documentation, and I'm like, wow, it's going to take us forever to start documenting everything and understand what is what and where is what. And then, yes, and then the enabling session. So enable everyone to do their own things with data. So you can also organize experiment meetings where you start discussing your hypothesis. We used to have experiment meetings at a small PDF from the very beginning. And we also have experiment meetings here. I always suggest to have experiment meetings. Experiment meetings really should involve everybody, right? So they can be initiated in the growth team, but in every team, and also they should involve marketing, data, they should involve everybody. And we should, and designers too, absolutely. So we discuss the hypothesis that we have and how can we experiment on those hypotheses. And start from a North Star metric and high level metrics to build the very, very simple first iteration of your company dashboards. And with the KPIs that you define, I'm not talking about many things, like a very simple North Star metric, 4 or 5 KPIs to start with, and then refine as you go. Because this is also something that happens all the time. We want to have the visibility over the data, and then we start building this infinite graph or of metric 3. The metric 3 project is everywhere, right? Everybody has the metric 3 project, but there's no metrics, and still nobody can visualize things. So start simple and then refine as you go and go deeper in what matters. I
Hmm.
think what I say all the time, simplicity. Simplicity
Yeah.
is the key in everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely the key. Talking about simplicity, I think it would be interesting to look at some of those simple tools that you started using, like when you get started growth, looking at your data toolkit now. What are those go-to tools or resources that had helped you blending your qualitative and quantitative insight together? What are those resources or books that you advise or you kind of want to share? Frameworks, could be book or mental models that are like game changer for you in your career.
I have been organizing my thoughts mostly on my own. So I read different people's blogs and books, and but at the end of the day, it was really an experimental process for myself. And I think in general, the way I work is very simple. I think it needs to be simple because it's complicated to jiggle into so many things at the same time. And one framework that I use, which is this ODI that I explained before, of outcome driven innovation, is something that definitely you guys want to look into. And this is a way that you can find and spot your opportunities. This was a very big game changer. But in terms of tools, I never use any particular tool that allows me to merge qualitative and quantitative insights together. Most of the time, I do it by myself. I use Miro boards or I connect the data in the warehouse. And a small PDF, I even built my A/B testing tool. It was called the Saras system and became the Super Saras system because we were processing so many data with that thing. And this was my way of connecting all the pieces together. So it was just like a system that we were using to review the results of our A/B tests. But there we had data regarding everything. Like we were measuring every single action that people would do. And it was something that I constructed myself, for example.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I would really say that I think we should be looking forward for like maybe a framework or a resources from your hand then, because since you're able to conjure some of these resources together, I think it would be valuable if you're able to release some of those your secret outs. But I just want to dig deep into that a little bit. Are there like specific books right now that could be helpful for some of our listeners that if they want to get started with data, specifically maybe for designers or whichever field they are working in products?
I don't want to recommend anything regarding to data, to be honest, because I think like there's so much going on, right?
Yeah.
You can tell you focus on AI and read this new AI book or read about machine learning. It really depends on the level that you want and what you're looking for, right? There is some ways that you can start learning the basis, just this data camp or this, Coursera, like the normal online tools that you can learn basic SQL, Python, or even just read some Medium blog posts that explain you how to start with Python. Or use ChatGPT and it's going to tell you how to start with Python. Very easy. SQL, Python, simple type of methodologies. How do you predict churn? How do you run your correlations? But then in growth, there's quite a lot of blog posts. Like for example, I use a lot of Reforge, and I use it back in the days. I still use it. They have a great material there. But I also follow, for example, Leah Taring blog posts or Elena Verna, and yeah, it's mostly like reading blog posts these days.
Good.
Yeah, so yeah, you've talked about like these resources, right? Shared a lot of those. Now, it's obvious that data is central to the way we will continue to design experiences. We can't escape it. So, now when we think about the data designer relationship, right? What I've found fascinating from when we had Ben on the podcast and also from the way you've talked about it, it sounds like it's a very close knit relationship between you two at work for a designer who might not have that, because honestly, as you were speaking, I was very jelly. But how do you begin to, when you phrase it out for designers, what kinds of skills should designers be on the lookout for? They can go do all the resources you talked about, but when it comes to those real time analytics, when it comes to in real context, how do you then, because I mean, Ben has to have learned a lot from you, from your relationship, right?
It was mutual. I also learned.
And you learned a lot from him. Exactly. Right. So, how can designers continuously build these kinds of skills to ensure that it's the future of the kind of work we do?
Yeah.
We need to be up to speed on that.
So I think in general, the real-time analytics and this feedback loop is something that will inform continued design decision in
Yeah.
pretty much all companies in the future, right? Now it's happening in some companies, big ones scaling down, but everywhere is gonna go this direction. And of course, this is gonna lead to more personalized, user-centric design. So in this context, a much deeper collaboration between designer, data scientist, and engineer is going to be extremely necessary. And I hope and I think that this will be supported by tools that integrate data insight into data design workflows. And I don't know this tool yet, but they will come out. So designers, they will definitely need to be able to anticipate the user needs with predictive analytics. So predictive machine learning models, etc. So they can be more intuitive in the user experience that they're going to build. So for this reason, their collaboration with data is going to be fundamental. And again, skills that they need to have there, it's data literacy, so understanding the concepts, the statistics, the analytics, and I would say some proficiency with SQL at minimum, like, just trying to like understand how it is. And the analytical thinking, so like the ability of breaking down complex issues and using the data to inform the decisions. So also the ability to assess the validity and the reliability of those data, right? Because I have seen designers that actually try to do it and then get data completely wrong. It is very important that me as a designer, I also own the metrics, right? I have a look at the metric, I catch it from a dashboard. Is it really what I'm looking at, what I'm looking for, or not? Because that is also something very important. And then some level of technical proficiency. I am not going to say that designers need to code, but if you have an idea of how the code works, and it is very good when you talk with any engineer. User research, very, very much important, and testing as well, especially if you work in growth, if you don't work in growth too. So you need to be able to organize an A/B test and at least think about how you're going to analyze this A/B test, right? So when you have an hypothesis, how can I test this hypothesis? When you have an hypothesis, so if I test this hypothesis this way, which kind of results am I looking for? I think it is very important that also like in the designer mind changes a little bit into an experimental approach as well. These are like the soft skills, but they are extremely important. Communication, communication, it's an issue in many cases and in all the different parts, like communicating the data insights to non-technical stakeholders, more technical stakeholders, conveying a nice story, a nice narrative behind it. It is very important how you present your things. It's going to make a huge difference. Mm-hmm. And curiosity in general, this is normal, and obviously collaboration, teamwork, fundamental, because we're going into a direction where you designers, PMs, engineers, and everybody's going to work super close. So teamwork, collaboration, and that's the most important things.
So you heard it here first. That's like the secret sauce for the relationship between Sarah and Ben. Okay.
I think you just talk with the relationship between her and Ben. Like it's really, really. I need to tell Ben to watch out for you. but honestly, the way she was talking about how they both work in mirror, I was like trying to visualize my like really well. But I wouldn't say I'm jealous. I'm not.
Oh, I am. I'm shameless about it. I am. It's a really cool working relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, it's been a fantastic conversation so far. Just one question from my hand, right? If our listeners like could go away with just one thing that they want to implement straightforward from this conversation to become more data savvy as a good designer, what would that be?
Besides the fact that you can just simply go and gather some resources and start reading about this, I think what you can do today is to go and talk to a data scientist in your company, a data analyst or a PM that knows a little bit about data. Ask him about the data that we have. What kind of data we have? How can I access them? Then you most likely, if you're a designer, you take a piece of the product, a feature, a painful part of the journey, whatever, put it on a mirror board and start putting sticky notes with the data, that whatever data that you find in whatever form that you find. And then start questioning, right? What is it that you have? What is it that you don't have? How can you find ways to gather the data that you don't have? And then what is it that you want to learn? And then the spark will arrive and then you will find a way. But I would suggest to use a concrete example of something that you want to achieve, that you're learning, and at the same time you're sort of like producing something. And it's always great when you, at the end of the day, you're not only doing theoretical stuff, but like practicing in real life.
In real life, bottom line, in real life. All right. It has been a fantastic conversation with you. We've gone over so many things. First of all, getting into that understanding of why your data which we've gotten a taste of that. just going over how you went from modeling hot into growth work, your work across these different companies, how you're able to achieve a very high level of quantitative and qualitative balancing, right? And also, we've gone over details around cultivating data driven cultures within different companies, how data scientists and designers themselves can approach data in a different way, whether it's gaining more context as a data scientist or designer, figuring out the resources, which we've given a lot of that in this episode, right? We've also looked at your data toolkit. You've given us those resources that designers can use to get started. So it's been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for your insight and your expertise, Sarah.
Thanks a lot, guys. It was fun, and I really appreciated you inviting me. I had a lot of fun.
That's good. All right, for everyone listening, this is the part where we remind you to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. This is really helpful for us, and we're excited to have more episodes and more guests coming up. So this is where we go into the lightning questions. And I know Emmanuel keeps shading me all the time that I'm not fast enough on the lightning round, but we will see how we do today. Okay, Sarah, you with me?
Yes.
Okay, let's get into it. Top 3 products that you use every day and you love.
I'm going to be boring here, guys. I use Miro, Figma, and Slack.
You're such a workaholic. Okay. All right. One product resource that you keep going back to.
I don't go back to anything, to be honest. The only thing that is not, there's one thing I keep going back to. It's not a product research, but it's helping me with product, and it's Alice in Wonderland.
Alice in Wonderland. Oh my goodness. Okay. You know what? We have to. This is why the lightning round can never lightning. What do you mean? I'm curious. How does Alice in Wonderland help you with product work?
Resources, yeah.
So I am going to speak in one of the very first product conferences in Italy in October. And I have my talk is going to be about product and Alice in Wonderland. Mm-hmm. And there is so much about product and about growth in Alice in Wonderland. It's unbelievable. Like, if you think about Alice in Wonderland, yes, that's interesting. I see your interested face. She is going through a process of self-discovery. She's exploring the world in Wonderland, but she's also exploring herself. And every time she goes around where she is, like everybody's asking her, who are you, right? And she would only reply, I'm Alice all the time. But this is something that really made me change the way that I speak to people. So I used to be, every time like people would ask me, I was just giving myself labels like, who are you? And I would say, I'm Sara, I'm a data scientist in a startup. I have a PhD. And then this sort of going back many times to Alice and where made me reflect, I am Sara because I'm Sara, right? So I really wanted to go down to the core values of myself. So Alice in Wonderland, it's a book that it gives input for personal development, and exactly the same way it applies to product development and product growth.
I would never have imagined that the Cheshire Cat had any other thing to do than just being a Cheshire Cat. But this is so cool. I'm actually excited about your talk in October. And will it be publicly available? Do you know?
The talk for sure, yes.
Okay, we'll wait then. I can't wait to see it. Okay, back to the lightning round. You can see Manu's face.
Before you start another section now, so
okay, what are 3 books that you would like to recommend to people?
Alice in Wonderland.
Obviously.
And Atomic Habits and Ikigai. And the Ikigai is a concept that I also use very often in my life.
Yeah, I love Ikigai. Okay, we're not going to start another one. So what profession will you be in instead of your current one?
So I think I would be a teacher as I said, in an ideal school system that at the moment doesn't exist. So the option is either I revolutionize the school system and become a teacher, or I just stick with growth.
Oh my God, I'm itching to ask so many more questions, but I will hold myself. What's your favorite food?
So my favorite food is rule of thumb. It is boring. It's chickpeas. I love chickpeas.
I love chickpeas.
Like people are like pizza, pasta, or whatever, and no, I just love chickpeas.
Yeah, you can put it in anything. It's really good.
Yeah, it's really good. I agree.
Okay. Favorite movie? Let me guess.
It's also Alice in Wonderland, guys. But everything Disney, I love Disney.
You must be a great fan of animations. You watch a lot of animations or cartoons, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
You see why we get along, Yumano? See why Sarah and I get along?
Yeah, yeah, that's you guys. You see, I was like, okay, 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 okay.
Yeah, no,
That's
anime
my fine.
right down. So yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Sarah. This has been fantastic. Till next time, guys. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye, guys.